Turned it off. Okay. Okay, Ruthe?
Yes.
Okay, we're connected now. Sorry about that.
Okay. So, as I was saying, I am Ruthe Farmer, and I work here at the White House. And my job is to make sure that there is computer science education for all kids in every place in the United States. So, kind of a big job. And you can probably see that I like robots. I have BB-8 over my shoulder. I also have a BB-8 coffee mug that I got at Lucasfilm's offices. This was the Lucasfilm staff Christmas present. And I have a real BB-8 who lives on my desk and sometimes drives around the White House to visit people. He's very fun. I also have game developer Barbie, which you can't buy anymore, and computer engineer Barbie over here. So, oh, and this one too. I have Darkside Ollie, who can go 17 miles an hour. So I really like robots, my point. So I actually have been here at the White House about 8 months. I used to be at the National Center for Women in IT, and before that I worked at the Girl Scouts. So I've been doing a lot of this stuff related to computer science and engineering education for a long time. And I can certainly answer any questions that you guys have, but just to kind of, in short, tell you, I mean, most of you probably saw the video from President Obama this year about how he says kids should, not just play with your phone, but actually make the phone and make all the apps that run on the phone. And we, here at the White House, do a lot of interesting things with technology to solve some of the problems that exist in the world. So we recently had a game-a-thon on Monday, and Shaquille O'Neal participated, and we were trying to help gamers sign up for health insurance using online gaming. So that was pretty cool. And today we're having a big event talking about students of color getting access to jobs in computer science. Tomorrow we have the movie Hidden Figures, and we have Pharrell here to talk with the First Lady about the history of women in NASA. So there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in the White House related to computer science and education and getting more kids engaged and involved. So I've been really proud of President Obama and the administration and how much focus they've put on this. But for you, where you are right now, I think it's important to realize that, one, the technology that you're using right now is younger than you are. And the technology that you're probably going to work on when you are my age hasn't even been dreamed of or invented yet. So, who would have thought that you could actually build a robot right now today that actually acts and looks just like the real BB-8 of the movie? That it's just not science fiction anymore, that you really could do that. So I think it's interesting to think about all the big things that technology can do now. We can probably do 10 times as much once you guys are out of college and working on designing those different solutions. You could be solving all kinds of interesting problems like transportation or space travel, or making sure there's enough clean water on the earth. There's all kinds of ways that the technology, that's the same technology that you're using to watch this video and using to play games, will be the foundation of the technology that's going to feed people and transport people and keep people healthy in the future. So it's really, really interesting to think about, because the technology that is going to probably be your job doesn't exist yet. So the important thing for you to understand and learn is how all of this works from a conceptual viewpoint, like what is computing and what is the use of numbers and ones and zeros to make things happen with technology, and then what can you imagine with that, as opposed to like exactly learning Java or Scratch or any particular program. It's what you can really do with it that's really important. So I'm happy to answer questions about my job, about computer science. Any questions out in the audience?
I think what we'll do,
Yes, I see a hand over in Mr. Glover's class.
okay. So Mrs. Glover, do you want to unmute your mic and you can have your kiddo walk up and ask the question?
Still muted. There you go. Good.
Step back a little bit more. There you go. Right there. Yeah, go ahead. Ask your question.
Did you make BB-8?
I did not make BB-8. BB-8 was made by a company called Sphero that is actually only about 4 or 5 years old, and they're based in Boulder, Colorado. I've been to their office, and they have the little BB-8s, but they have the big ones too, just like in the movie. And the way that actually happened was these two guys were in graduate school, and they figured out how you could use a gyroscope to make a robot that was a ball. And so they made this robot called Sphero that's just a ball. And you can do all kinds of things with it, and it's waterproof. You can put it in the swimming pool. You can dip it in paint and draw with it. It's just using gyroscope technology to make something move. Well, they ended up in this thing called Disney Techstars, which is like a competition where if you have a business idea that's in technology, you can go to Techstars and you work on your idea and then you present it in front of people. And this one happened to be at Disney, and the head guy at Disney saw their robot. So then they said, you know, in the new Star Wars, we're making a robot that's kind of a ball. Could you help us? And so that's how they ended up being the company that made the BB-8 toy. And like, that's huge for a little bitty company with just like a few people in Colorado to suddenly be making all the robot toys for a movie like Star Wars. It's pretty cool. I wish I'd made it. Then I would be rich.
Do we have another question?
I see a question. Oh, look at all those questions.
What was your latest project?
So the latest thing I did was Computer Science Education Week, which you guys probably all took part in. So this last week, we had a Girls Make Games event here at the White House where about 30 girls between probably 12 and 14 came and learned how to make video games. We also had lots of people visit around the country. So I went to a hackathon game development event in New York City, and we had a robot event out in Oklahoma. So Computer Science Education Week is a big week every year for everybody in the country, but the White House and the president definitely gets involved. Okay, who's next?
Okay. The young lady in Mrs. Glover's room, would you like to ask your question next?
What's your favorite coding game?
Ooh, that's super hard. That's super hard because there's so many cool ones. I think my favorite coding game is one that you make yourself. And, you know, because there's so much opportunity in games because only a fraction of the people in the world make the games, right? So they make the games they want to play. So the best games are the ones that you make for yourself. A lot of noise. I really, really like the Moana Hour of Code, though, just because I really like the movie Moana.
Okay. Does anybody else
Who's next?
have a question? Okay. We do have a question from someone here, but I saw a child that was standing up in Mrs. Glover's room, and then we'll ask one from here if that's okay. Okay, go ahead.
Favorite thing about coding?
Say that again.
What's your favorite thing about coding?
I think it's because you can make anything, right? You think of it like what do you like about drawing, right? If you're drawing, you have like a blank piece of paper and you can make anything you want on that paper. the same thing with computer science and coding is that you can take something that's, basically a blank piece of paper. It just happens to be on the computer, and you can make it do all kinds of things. So I think one of my favorite things, though, is when you take the coding and you combine it with some kind of device like a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino, and you make it do something like physical. So I heard about some kids that wanted to figure out whose dog was the fastest. So they got these microbit, which is kind of like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. It's a little device. And they built this thing, they put it on the dog, and they throw balls and then measure the data on whose dog went fastest. Just, they built something to try something out. It was like a little experiment. I think that's pretty cool.
Okay. And we have another question.
Hi, Dr. Farmer. Thank you for being with us today. The question I have, maybe I speak for behalf of the team, we're a committee on learner work. And the one question we have for you would be, what recommendation do you have for us to look 3-4 years down the road that would help our learners the best? What's the one tip you have for us as a public educational system to meet all learners' needs in 3 to 4 years down the road? Thank you.
All learners in 3 to 4 years. That's a big one. So given that I don't know exactly the status of your district at this time, I think the key is to, one, make sure there's foundational computational thinking that is being integrated even at the earliest grades, starting in pre-K. There's some very successful programs doing binary counting and computational thinking in pre-K around the nation, and using robots to teach spelling and math and so on. That's pretty interesting. I think also that there's, whether it's games or hardware activity, there tends to be a lot of gendered curricula out there in those particular spaces. And so I think making sure that there's lots of different options of how students can explore with computing. I think the question that was just asked about, what is your favorite game? I think that's really the secret power of computing, is that you can let the kids completely self-direct what they're going to explore. And the technology is the platform to explore whatever that interest might be. I strongly believe that there is a huge value add and lift for students when they are committed to the problem they are solving, because it's something that they chose.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody, it looks like we have another question.
What's your favorite Star Wars character?
Ooh. Well, I do like BB-8, but I would say, I think Rey. I really like Rey because she's an engineer and she knows how to fix things, and she's still really awesome, but her awesomeness is how she's an engineer and can do technical stuff. That's my favorite.
I do have a question for you as well, because we are very fortunate not we, I'm not a child anymore, but there are things like BB-8, and there are really good things that we can learn computational thinking as a kid. And I have a feeling that you probably didn't have that when you were a kid. So what got you interested in computer science?
So actually, when I was a kid, so back in the mid-'80s, they started introducing computers to the schools. And at the time, the computers were pretty boring. They just had a black screen with some little blipping blue lights and numbers and lines. It wasn't nearly as interesting as what kids see on a screen today. And actually, so the first computers that they put in the schools, the only thing you could do with a computer was program it, because there was no software. All the software that existed was used by big businesses and companies like on a mainframe machine. So early computer science education was really a lot like what the kids are doing now, and like building something something from scratch because there wasn't any software. And I think that's the key to getting kids excited is you need to have a aha moment of making something that's totally new that no one else has ever done before. And whether that's building a game in Scratch or figuring out how to build an app of your own or figuring out a robot that's going to do something, like having that aha moment is pretty important.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have one more young lady from Mrs. Glover's room, and then Mrs. Bieber has a question, and I know that your time is limited, so go ahead.
What's your favorite part of your job?
I think working at the White House is probably the best part of my job, because sometimes I get to see the White House dogs. Today I will get to see the president a little bit later after this phone call. And there's just so many really, really smart people here that care a lot about a lot of different things. So I work with people who are working on making it possible for humans to travel to Mars, people who are making it possible for people to live longer and get organs that have been 3D printed and replace organs with new ones that we've manufactured. So really, really cool science and technology that's at the like very cutting edge. So it's pretty cool to work with the smartest people in the world.
Mrs. Newstone, do we have a few more minutes? We have a few other friends who've already ran their questions by me. I don't know if we have enough time for them or not.
Is that okay, Ruth? Would that be okay to do a couple more?
Sure, we can do a couple more questions.
Okay.
Have you made any coding games?
You know, not recently. I've been very focused on making coders out of people like you. And so I don't have a whole lot of time to make stuff myself. But I might soon because I won't have a job much longer.
Do you like your job and why?
Well, I think I kind of already answered this one, but yes, I do. And I like my job because I get to invest my time in making things possible for students and young people and teachers and schools around the nation.
What do you think is the most important thing in coding?
The most important thing is trying things, and then if they don't work, trying again. Because the whole thing about computational thinking or coding is figuring out that if you made a mistake, you got to figure out where it was and go back and fix it. And so just not quitting, I think that's the most important thing. Because anything worth doing is going to be hard.
How many hours do you work in a day?
Probably around 14. Too many. So sometimes I don't go home until 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, wow. Okay. So your job sounds like super duper amazing, but also a little bit tiring. We just have one last question.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it is right now is just a really important time because the president is going to leave in January and we just have a lot to do. And so we're working a lot of hours to get a lot of things finished before the end. It's probably not like that all the time.
We do have a high school group, the I team, that is connecting with us right now. And a lot of the kids in that group are going to be going on to computer science majors. And their advisor wants to know, let me see this. We were wondering what happens to CS for All with the new administration.
So, Computer Science for All is a national movement that is well over 500 organizations doing this work. You know, there's code.org, there's Girls Who Code, there's the CS for All Consortium, there's organizations all over the country that are doing this. So, and before we had an official Computer Science for All initiative, there were a lot of people doing this already. So I think we're well on our way. There's school teachers and districts just like yourselves that are committed. So I think it's going to be just fine. And there's also a lot of people here that work in the government that are going to continue to work in the government, even because they're not political. They're just going to continue to do their jobs. And I've given all of them all the information they need to keep working on computer science.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's all good.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And we know